I'm Jane Miller for acoustic guitar, and today I'm going to be showing you some tricks that I developed to play over changes, chord changes that might not stay in any one key or that sort of take you in different places where maybe one scale won't work. So one thing you can do is use triad forms and just sort of superimpose them over seventh chords. And then you have this great place to start. So the topic really is about visualizing the chords as they happen around the neck. So to get that up and running, it's just best to start with ones that you probably already know pretty well, like D. And then you can use this F chord, just sort of a piece of this larger F chord, a piece of the bar chord, right? Just this little triad shape for F. And then B flat, also part of the larger B flat that you might know. Right, so the three triad shapes we'll mostly use will be D major, F major, and B flat. And so that's what's happening in example 1. Example 2 just shows them in different places. So if you move this D, what looks like a triangle shape, right? If you move that up so that instead of F sharp as your high note, put B as your high note, that turns it into a G chord. So really what we're thinking about is F sharp is the third of the chord, right, of a D chord. And so B is the third of a G chord. There it is. This shape that we used for F before, we've got the F as the high note on top, move that all the way up to C. And now that's a C chord. And then D, you can just move that up a whole step to get the D chord. So now we have G, C, D, pretty familiar sound, right? That's a 1-4-5 in the key of G. Blues, you know, a lot of folk songs, blues, lots of different styles use that 1-4-5. So there we go through examples 1, and then example 2 is moving that up to G. Example 3, move it up to C. Example 4, move it up to D. So if you put them in the form of 1-4-5, you could put here, right? Another place to put these. So here's the G on top now. The D is the high note of this G chord. Here's C now. It looks like what we were thinking of as D before. That's E, by the way, on top. That's the third of a C chord. And then here's D, with the D as your high note. Right? So you can still hear the 1-4-5 in there. So that hits a few different ways to play the G-C-D progression. So now if you want to put a melody to that, you can start by just breaking up those chords. So I'm just using the first 3 strings of the guitar, but if you wanted to play, here's the chord progression. Wanted to play over that, one way is to just use these chord forms to visualize your way through it, right? These. Here's a melody that comes right from those chords. Right, so you could hear how that would fit over the 1-4-5 progression, and you can see the shapes that I used for the melody. Here it is again. Now you can interject some lines maybe that you'd use from a scale or some chromatic approaches. You can start to mix in some other notes besides those notes in the triad forms. So here's same progression. This will be example 8 now. Same progression. similar to example 7, but I'm just going to introduce a couple of other scale notes. Right, so really similar to example 7. I used the same forms. I went up to catch the high G chord at the end. So here we go again. Now, as you know, we need some minor chords too, where they're not all major chords, right? So to turn a D major into a D minor, flat the third. We already talked about F sharp being the third. Just turn that into F natural. So there's D minor, here's F minor, right, with the A flat. And then here's B flat minor with the D flat in it. So when you need minor chord forms, you can go through all the major chord forms that we have looked at and turn them all into minor by flatting the third. So again, D minor, F minor, and B flat minor. And these are movable. If you just stay with the first 3 strings, you can move them all around. So the third of the chord on top, right? The root on top here. So if you need a G minor, put the root on top, G. And then B flat minor has the 5th of the chord on top. Move that up a whole step. Now it's C minor with the 5th of C minor on top. So they move around the same way, whether they're major, minor. They're shapes that we can remember and plug into chords. So if you start with something that you're pretty familiar with, like the 1, 4, 5, and G, for example, something very common, you'll get the hang of that, finding the shapes of the chords in different places and then connecting them. Your ears will guide you. You can use little chromatic approaches or scales that you might connect. Where it gets trickier is when the chord progression is sort of going all over the place. It might not stay in any one key, or there might be 2 or 3 chords in a measure or something like that, where you don't have a lot of time to think about what scale are you going to use. So it's really good to have these shapes really to refer to. So here's a way you can think of it. Minor 7 chords have the triad contained. G minor 7 has a G minor triad contained right in it. So you can just use that. And that's a direct match, G minor 7, G minor. You can also think about other chord qualities. For example, a D minor triad is what sits on top of a B flat major 7 chord. So in the song The Shape of Things, when you come to a B flat major 7 chord, what I used was this D minor triad. Right, so here's B flat in the bass. And now when you hear the D minor triad, it doesn't sound like D minor anymore. It sounds like B flat major 7, right? So you can make that work. So you're like superimposing these triad shapes on the 7th chords. So that's what we get into in the song. You heard the fast version of it, but let's break it down a little. Diminished triads are super useful when we come to dominant 7 chords. Diminished triads sit right on top of a dominant 7 chord. Think about C7. It's got the notes C, E, G, and B flat. Well, E, G, and B flat make an E diminished triad. So, we use inversions just like we did with the G, C, D. So here's an E diminished triad, but it's a second inversion of that, B flat, E, and G. So if you want to get into the theory of it, it's an E diminished triad. But if you put C in the bass, really you can even see it when you make a bar chord, C7. That's a C dominant 7 chord, but it's got that diminished shape on top. So those work really well. That came up a few times in the song, in the melody that I wrote out. I mean, this is an example of something that you could improvise. Obviously, it's not improvised, but it's a way that you could approach these chords and come up with some similar lines. A diminished triad came up again on this C7. This is just another inversion of that E diminished triad. I think I used it again up here for D7, right? So there's an F sharp diminished triad. Another trick I used on F major 7, I used an A minor triad. And that's in measure 11. So let's work this song out. We're not really thinking of it as a song with a melody yet. I mean, it could be. But what we're focusing on is how you would improvise over these chords. So the melody that it's shown is supposed to be an example of an improvisation. So let's break it down a little. I'll show you how to practice. I highly recommend using a metronome. Make a backing track. The fast version of it that you heard was 138. But let's break it down, slow it down, and get the metronome on the backing track. I've stealthily set up an iMac here, so we can put it maybe at, let's see, about 88, 86, about like that. Right? So make a backing track. You can just use voice memo on your phone. Just keep it real simple. And just to have something to play against so that you hear how these triads get plugged in on the 7th chords. Here we go. Give yourself a count, too, so that you know when to come in when you're working on the melody. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. Alright, so now when we play the track back, you'll hear how these triad shapes that you see on the page fit against those 7th chords. Now that we've seen how these triad forms work with the seventh chords, and more importantly, we've heard how they work with the seventh chords, let's break them up into melodic lines now. And keep it at the slow tempo. I'll put the backing track back on, and we'll just play along to it in the melodic form. So there's my lesson on using triads and smaller chord forms to help you visualize the neck in a way that will help you improvise over chord changes. For acoustic guitar, I'm Jane Miller. Thanks for watching.